The first thing you hear is not the sound of a leader speaking. It's the sound of confusion, the sharp blast of a car horn, a soldier shouting orders, and a group of ordinary Nigerians standing helplessly at the edge of a dusty construction site. Their phones are out, their hands shaking, because they know they are witnessing something rare in a country where power usually moves in only one direction from the top down. A black truck sits across the narrow gate blocking the entrance. On one side stands a minister famous, feared, and very used to obedience. On the other side stands a single soldier young enough to be his son, firm enough to refuse him entry. There is no script for this moment. No advisor whispering what to say. No bodyguard stepping in. Just two men face to face in a standoff that exposes something bigger than land, bigger than politics, the crumbling moral boundary between authority and abuse. People watching from the roadside whisper to each other, "Is this really happening?" Because everyone knows what usually happens when a powerful man is told no. Usually, something breaks either a person or the truth itself, but not today. Today, a soldier raises his voice and says, "I am not a fool, sir." And across Nigeria, millions felt something they had not felt in a long time. Someone finally stood up to power. Yet this question lingers quietly but painfully. If one soldier can stop a minister in broad daylight, how many leaders across Africa have been acting unchecked behind closed doors while no one watches, no one records, and no one is allowed to speak? And that is where this story turns eastward toward Tanzania, where thousands of grieving families are still waiting for the world to acknowledge the horror they have lived through. Stay with me, because what begins as a shouting match in Nigeria becomes a mirror reflecting the deeper crisis unfolding across the continent. If you believe ordinary people deserve leaders who protect them, not silence them, please continue watching. And if you're new here, subscribe so you never miss the truth behind the headlines. The scene begins with dust swirling in the late afternoon heat, one of those heavy, unmoving Nigerian afternoons where even the air seems to hesitate. A small crowd has gathered at the edge of a contested plot of land. Men lean against their motorcycles. Women shield their eyes from the sun. No one speaks loudly. They all know the tension in the air is not the kind that welcomes noise. Then comes the moment that pulls every phone into the air. A siren wails in the distance, brief, impatient, announcing the arrival of someone who is used to being obeyed before he even steps out of the car. The convoy of the Minister of the Federal Capital Territory rolls in tires, crunching gravel doors opening with the confidence of power. People step aside instinctively. They've seen scenes like this before. They think they already know how it ends. But today is different. At the gate of the property, a military truck is parked sideways, deliberately blocking the minister's path. In front of it stands a soldier alone, rigid, silent, except for the clipped commands he gives his own men. And behind him, the developers and workers on the site freeze like statues, waiting to see who will blink first. The minister approaches with sharp, determined steps. His voice rises immediately, not in greeting, but in challenge. He demands access. He declares authority. He invokes his office, his rank, his seniority. He gestures toward the land behind the gate and insists he has issued a stop-work order. In his mind, the matter should already be settled, but the soldier does not move. He repeats the words that ignite the entire confrontation. "I have orders from above, sir." In that moment, the air seems to hold its breath. The minister lashes out. He insults the soldier, calling him a fool again and again, as if authority alone should make the insult feel true. The soldier stands firm, no trembling, no wavering, no stepping aside. And then, with a voice shaking not from fear but from conviction, he answers, "I am not a fool, sir." That single sentence shatters the old script. The roadside crowd reacts instantly. Their eyes widen. A few stifle gasps. This is not how power dynamics work in Nigeria, at least not in public. A soldier talking back to a minister losing control in front of ordinary people. It feels unprecedented, almost cinematic. The verbal battle escalates. The minister reminds the soldier of age difference. "When I graduated, you were in primary school." He tries to reframe the confrontation as a matter of respect, as though time itself should bend to his authority. But the soldier, this one young man with dust on his boots, does not budge. Behind the soldier, the parked truck is more than metal and rubber. It's a physical symbol of defiance. Someone far above the soldier, someone powerful enough to counter a minister, has given orders that cannot be ignored. And that raises a much larger question: who exactly controls this land, and why is it worth this level of confrontation? Within hours, journalists begin digging. Sahara Reporters releases documents and testimonies suggesting that this very minister, the one shouting about illegality, has himself been linked to questionable land reallocations. They claim he revoked large plots 30 hectares from top military officers, reallocating some to political allies, including a recently appointed national electoral official. The crowd at the site doesn't know all of this yet, but they feel something deeper, the imbalance of power closing in on itself. A minister used to unquestioned obedience suddenly finds himself facing someone who cannot be intimidated, not because he is more powerful, but because he is following a different chain of command. And to the ordinary Nigerian standing there watching with phones raised, it feels like a rare reversal of the natural order. For once, someone in uniform is not being used against the people. For once, someone is standing up to a man who has never known resistance. In their eyes, the soldier becomes the everyman, the one person speaking a truth many feel but cannot say. And this is only the beginning. The air changed the moment the video of the confrontation hit the internet. What had started as a tense standoff on a dusty roadside in Abuja quickly morphed into a nationwide moment of collective exhale. Nigerians gathered online in cafes and offices and replayed the clip over and over. With every replay, the soldier's voice grew louder in the public imagination. "I am not a fool, sir." For many citizens, it felt as though those words were spoken on their behalf. Across the country, everyday people, drivers stuck in traffic market, women finishing their day's sales, students scrolling during lunch breaks were asking the same question: did someone finally tell him no? In a nation where powerful figures rarely encounter resistance, the confrontation became more than a disagreement over land. It became a symbol of dignity reclaimed. The crescendo of that moment, the verbal blowback between minister and soldier, triggered a level of public reaction neither man expected. The crowd at the scene had sensed the shift instantly, but the online crowd took it further. Social media exploded with laughter, shock, and disbelief. Memes flooded timelines. Some mocked the minister's attempt to bully the young soldier. Others praised the soldier for refusing to bend. A new chant emerged: "I am not a fool." Simple, defiant, national. But beneath the humor lay a deeper current of frustration, a collective exhaustion with leaders who wield power like a personal weapon. As the video circulated, journalists began pulling old files, digging into past controversies. Sahara Reporters, known for exposing corruption, resurfaced allegations that the very man accusing others of land grabbing had previously revoked land belonging to top military officers. Not just any plots, 30 hectares in total. Some parcels, they said, were allegedly handed to political allies, including a newly appointed electoral chairman. The implications were explosive. A man entrusted with safeguarding public land now stood accused of redistributing it for personal and political gain. Suddenly, the soldier's refusal no longer looked like insubordination. It looked like a defense not just of a patch of soil, but of integrity. Within the military, murmurs grew louder. Former officers began giving interviews. Then a retired chief of army staff broke the silence. His statement was measured but firm. The minister's conduct, he said, undermines the authority of the commander-in-chief and weakens the integrity of the armed forces. For soldiers across the ranks, this was not a small accusation. It was a message the institution stands before any individual. It also signaled that the soldier who stood his ground might not be abandoned, something Nigerians feared would happen once the cameras were gone. Meanwhile, the minister's political opponents seized the moment. They resurfaced old grievances, accusations of using security forces to intimidate citizens, deploying influence to reshape political landscapes, and interfering with elected state leadership. People whispered, he finally tasted his own medicine. But the crescendo of reactions wasn't just about blame, it was about recognition. A segment of society that had long felt invisible suddenly saw a form of justice, however small, play out in real time. For them, the soldier was a mirror reflecting a deeper longing, the desire for leaders who listen, who respect, who understand the weight of public trust. Yet, the tension didn't stop with celebration. Underneath the cheering was a quieter fear. Would there be consequences for the soldier? In countries where political retaliation is common, many worried that the bravery displayed on camera might be punished in private. Comments online were filled with anxious hopes. Protect him. His superiors must shield him. He did nothing wrong. And then came the moment that pushed public emotion even higher. A rumor spread that senior military officials were rallying behind the soldier, ensuring he wouldn't be hung out to dry. Supporters rejoiced. Skeptics held their breath. No one could say for sure how far the minister might go to reassert dominance or whether quiet deals would be made behind closed doors. But something undeniable had shifted. One confrontation, one young soldier had shaken the image of untouchable power. For a brief moment, ordinary Nigerians felt aligned with the uniform, not oppressed by it. And that emotional turning point prepared the ground for an even darker revelation awaiting in Tanzania, a place where citizens dared to speak and paid with their lives. The shift from Nigeria's noisy, chaotic confrontation to Tanzania's haunting silence feels almost like stepping from daylight into a darkened chapel. The sounds change first. In Nigeria, people laughed, argued, replayed a video of a soldier standing up to power. But in Tanzania, the sound is something else entirely, the muffled cries of families searching for missing loved ones, the low rumble of military trucks passing at night, and the kind of silence that governments manufacture when they want the world to forget. What happened after Tanzania's 2025 election was not an argument, not a disagreement, not even a disputed result. It was a national wound, a wound so deep that even now, months later, people speak of it with lowered voices, as if the trauma could return simply by being remembered too loudly. The nation had been told that the incumbent president had won by 97 to 98% numbers, so unrealistic that even longtime supporters blinked in disbelief. For ordinary Tanzanians, the math was not the only insult. It was the aftermath. It was the way unarmed civilians poured into the streets demanding clarity, only to be met by rifles instead of answers. Human rights organizations estimate that between 1,000 and 3,000 people were killed. Not detained, not wounded, killed. To a viewer in America, especially someone over 60, those numbers call to mind the most tragic chapters of global history. They are not statistics, they are human beings. Fathers who didn't return home from protests, mothers shot while running, teenagers who thought they were marching for their future, children who disappeared into the chaos. And then came the darkest revelation. Across Tanzania, reports emerged of military trucks transporting bodies to remote areas. The name Mabu Pandi began circulating, whispered at first, then spoken louder as more families stepped forward. It was said to be one of several places where mass graves were dug hurriedly and secretly to hide the scale of the killings. The earth itself had become a witness to crimes no one was supposed to see. In the middle of this horror, another tragedy unfolded, smaller in scale, but enormous in symbolism. A 26-year-old woman, just a store owner who sold cosmetics and face masks, recorded a TikTok video. She danced to a viral protest song. She joked that people should buy her masks to protect themselves from tear gas. For this, she was arrested, beaten, and charged with treason, a crime punishable by death. Her name became a rallying cry, a reminder that in some countries joy itself is treated as rebellion. Yet even in fear, Tanzanians responded with dignity. Crowds filled her store, buying everything in sight simply to show support. It wasn't about cosmetics. It was about refusing to let the government erase another young life. And where were Africa's leaders? The African Union. The very institution meant to safeguard democracy issued a letter congratulating the president on her victory, as though the bodies in the streets did not exist, as though thousands of funerals were just rumors, as though blood did not stain the ground of a country that once spoke proudly of unity. For many Africans watching from Nigeria, Ghana, Kenya, and beyond, the silence of their leaders felt like betrayal. For Americans watching from afar, it felt painfully familiar, a reminder of how institutions can fail when they choose comfort over courage. The political consequences in Tanzania are still unfolding. Fear is tightening its grip. Activists have fled. Journalists have disappeared. Citizens whisper instead of speak. And every mass grave, whether acknowledged or hidden, becomes another crack in the foundation of a nation struggling to remember its own humanity. In the shadow of all this, people across Africa are asking, if power can silence Tanzania so completely, who will it come for next? In cities across the United States, Atlanta, Minneapolis, New York, African Americans and African immigrants gathered in small community halls, churches, and living rooms, watching the reports coming out of Tanzania with quiet disbelief. Many of them have lived long enough to know what state violence looks like. They have seen fire hoses, police dogs, and riots. They have heard the words maintaining order used as a shield for brutality. So when they watched the images from East Africa, bodies carried into trucks, families begging for answers, the reaction was not shock. It was sorrow mixed with recognition. Because oppression has an accent, but the pain is universal. For policymakers in Washington, the Tanzania crisis triggered difficult questions. The U.S. State Department had already been monitoring shrinking civic space in several African nations. But the scale of the killings, 1,000 to 3,000 civilians, according to human rights investigators, pushed Tanzania into a different category, not merely troubled, but potentially in violation of international human rights norms. American analysts quietly debated whether targeted sanctions, visa restrictions, or a formal investigation through the UN Human Rights Council would be necessary. Yet the Biden administration and the American foreign policy establishment more broadly has always walked a delicate line in Africa. On the one hand, the U.S. speaks the language of democracy, civil rights, and rule of law. On the other, it competes with China, Russia, and regional powers for influence, security, cooperation, and access. Tanzania, like many African states, sits at that intersection, and so Washington moved cautiously, too cautiously, for many observers. Statements were issued, but they were measured. Condemnations were worded carefully. Even as reports of mass graves circulated, America's response came wrapped in diplomatic restraint. Some activists felt betrayed. Others argued that the U.S. must prioritize stability in a region where extremism, economic fragility, and geopolitical competition collide. But ordinary Americans, especially older generations who lived through Vietnam, the civil rights movement, and apartheid sanctions campaigns, saw the situation more clearly. They asked a question that politicians rarely voice. If we say we stand for human rights, then how can we look away? In international circles, the reactions were similarly fractured. The African Union remained publicly silent. Its congratulatory letter to Tanzania's leader stood in painful contrast to the testimonies of grieving families. European nations demanded transparency, but stopped short of concrete action. China invested heavily in Tanzania's infrastructure projects, avoided criticism entirely. And in the middle of this global hesitation stood one unexpected point of contrast: Burkina Faso, under the leadership of President Ibrahim Traoré. While other nations bent under pressure, Traoré had taken a radically different path, strengthening civilian protections, disciplining the military, limiting foreign interference, and insisting that the role of leadership is service, not domination. For some American observers, it raised an uncomfortable but necessary question. Why is a small, landlocked West African nation showing more moral clarity than entire regional blocs and global powers? As think tanks in Washington debated democratic backsliding and international norms, one truth whispered through many discussions: leadership is not about titles or elections. It is about what a leader chooses to defend power or people. And in Tanzania, the world watched a government defend power at the cost of its citizens. In Burkina Faso, they watched a leader defend citizens at the cost of his own political comfort. For Americans especially, those who have seen history repeat itself again and again, this contrast became a quiet call to pay closer attention, not because Africa is fragile, but because Africa is a mirror. It shows the world what happens when nations forget the simple truth that no government can claim legitimacy while silencing the voices of its own people. When the dust settles in places like Nigeria and Tanzania, it is not the sound of gunfire or shouting that lingers. It is the quiet of mothers waiting by windows long after sunset, the quiet of families lighting candles for sons who never came home, the quiet that spreads across a nation when people realize that speaking the truth may cost them everything, yet silence costs even more. In Tanzania, that quiet has become a second skin. The mass graves at Mabu Pandi, the 26-year-old woman charged with treason for a TikTok dance, the thousands of lives lost after a single election, these are not events that disappear simply because officials refuse to acknowledge them. Trauma has a long memory, and it always returns to collect what was never healed. Every nation that has lived through its own dark chapter, from the United States to South Africa, knows this well. And as we watch the contrast unfold across Africa, a painful truth emerges. Power can be loud, but justice is patient. Power shouts, justice whispers. And those whispers grow louder each time an ordinary person stands up, whether it's a soldier in Nigeria refusing to be humiliated or a young Tanzanian woman refusing to let fear erase her humanity. But whispers become movements only when people refuse to look away. In that sense, the crisis in Tanzania is not just an African story, it is a human story. It is a warning that democratic institutions can fracture quietly, then collapse all at once. It is a reminder to Americans, especially those who have witnessed decades of global struggle, that violence is never born overnight. It grows in silence, in unchecked power, in the dangerous belief that certain leaders are too important to be questioned. And it is also a reminder that new examples of courage are rising from unexpected places. In West Africa, leaders like Ibrahim Traoré in Burkina Faso have chosen a path that centers dignity, accountability, and national sovereignty, proving that strength does not always come from force, but from faithfulness to one's people. Many viewers following Africa News are beginning to ask, do we want leaders who fear the people or leaders who protect them? As Tanzania fights to reclaim its voice, and as Nigeria continues to negotiate the fragile balance between authority and justice, each of us, no matter where we live, must ask a final uncomfortable question. If thousands can die in silence in one nation, how long before that silence spreads to others? And so I turn this back to you. Do you think the world is doing enough to protect ordinary Africans when their own governments fail them? And can leaders like President Ibrahim Traoré truly inspire a new standard for leadership across the continent? Please share your thoughts in the comments. Your voice matters more than you know. And if you believe the truth is always more important than the headlines, please subscribe before you leave. Until next time, stay alert, stay compassionate, and stay on the side of those who have no microphone of their own.